All right. Well, thanks everyone for making it here today to join us for our Palmyra Town Hall with Jesse Johnson. A lot of new faces, so I can provide a brief intro for Jesse. Um, Jesse's the creator and curator of the Palmyra Atoll Digital Archive, which is an amazing site packed with photos, history, information. So I do recommend people check it out if you haven't done so yet. And I can put the link in the chat for you all. And really, his interest in Palmyra just kind of started as a personal endeavor, kind of a side project, but turned into a much greater passion project. And Jesse did have the opportunity to go to Palmyra in 2019 and is arguably one of our biggest fans. And he's been super generous. We pester him periodically to see if he's willing to teach us something new about the place that we work at and manage. And we always come away learning something new, and it's been really, really fun learning some of these things about Palmyra and its history. Very fascinating. And this one will be focused on commercial fishing use at Palmyra. Was just one of our interests. So I guess with that, Jesse, if there's anything else you want to add about yourself, and thank you again for providing this presentation that you've put together.
Thanks for the kind words. Yeah, that was a lot of nice ways to say that I'm obsessive about Palmyra history and unhealthy attachment. So I appreciate all that. But yeah, no, like you said, I fell in love with this place a while ago, and it's been such an incredible experience to get to know the folks who work there and keep it safe and make it better, and all the things that everybody is learning because of the work being done on Palmyra. So I really appreciate the chance to, I don't know, justify some of the time I spend digging up all this random stuff about a place I wish more people knew about, or maybe less people did, depending on who you ask. Right? We don't want everybody to don't let all the secrets out. So anyway, yeah. So I'll go ahead and get started here. There we go. So like I said, the idea of commercial fishing history of Palmyra is a little, again, what I love about the place is it's like all roads lead to Palmyra. Like if you pick a topic, there's some, even if it's a random obscure way that it's connected in. So having these specific topics is always fun because you get to dive in and see from different angles where the history leads you. But I wanted to choose a kind of a big, larger, Pacific-wide example of something that Palmyra was involved in, and then dig into some of this smaller side too. It has such deep ties to the fishing community in Hawaii that there's a lot of good stories that come out of that. So I just picked two stories, two people I thought were especially interesting to talk about when it comes to Palmyra's history. But I always like to say at first, please interrupt with questions and comments. I don't have any kind of, flow or vein that I get in, and I feel like I can't get pulled out of. This is my chance to talk about this stuff too, and to learn from everybody here. So I love being corrected. I love being asked in the middle of other things about deeper topics and getting completely rabbit trailed. So I always try to build time in kind of between the sections, and then also at the end for Q&A. So there's, I'm happy to spend as much time as you guys want nerding out about Palmyra, but again, feel free to jump in at any time. So yeah, with that, so I just wanted to talk about two stories here. Now, Dr. Wilbert Chapman, I'm sure lots of folks have heard of. He's I hadn't, but he's very well known both in the fisheries community, fisheries science, and he's got a really cool connection to Palmyra. And then Mark Collins is a guy that I just found in talking to King Roger of Palmyra, who was the superintendent there during the 90s. He just always has too many stories, and the one he used to tell a lot was Mark Collins' commercial fishing venture on Palmyra, which, as far as I can tell, is the last attempt at commercial fishing on Palmyra. That was 95 to 96. So very different guys, very different roles, but both really interesting. So Wilbert Chapman, there's a lot of documentation on Dr. Chapman. There's a lot of good books and material. He wrote a lot. He's a pretty prolific guy. So I'm not going to go too deep into his personal history because there's a lot of people that will do a much better job than me. The one thing I would say is he wrote this book. I think it was published in '49 called Fishing in Troubled Waters, which is about the first half of his story that I'm going to tell. And it was a really gifted writer. I mean, the guy didn't just write scientific papers and annotations. He had a really strong gift for interesting writing. So if you can find a copy of it, I highly recommend checking that out. It does mention Palmyra and his time in the Pacific during World War II, but yeah, overall, I wanted to focus on these 2 points where he spent time on Palmyra. One was during World War II in 1943, and then the next one was during the Pacific Ocean Fisheries Investigation, which I'm just going to call POFI because I don't want to say that every time, and that's sounds the least weird in my head. But if there's a better way to say that, I'm open to it. So just to give you a sense of where Palmyra was in the late 40s, I think everybody knows what it was like during World War II, which is an active naval base. And there are all kinds of photos in the archive. There's all kinds of material I have on that. It's probably the most documented period in Palmyra's history. But the late 40s, early 50s is a little different story. So you imagine that Navy leaves in 45, right? And they kind of just leave. Everybody gets on the boat. They go back to Honolulu. Nobody looks back. And it sat there for a couple of years. There were some studies that were done. There were some, in and out visitors on the way to other places in the Pacific. But in 1947, the CAA, which was the forerunner to the FAA, they had a colony of people living there from 47 to 49. This is families, kids. They had a school teacher. They had plays. They had a newspaper. It was really incredible. And they also converted all the old barracks into homes and used, and it's a little hard to see in the photo, but used unexploded ordnance for lawn ornaments because why not, right? But we've got some really great stuff from that period. Report cards, driver's licenses, just random stuff that really shows this is it was post-war America, but in the middle of the Pacific. And Otto Hornung was he called himself the caretaker or manager. He was hired kind of like Roger in the '90s. He was hired by the Fuller-Leo families to kind of run the place from during the CAA time and then into the '50s. So he comes up a lot in those stories. He was a regular figure. He didn't always live there, but it was his job to go out and meet people to make sure everything was running. Yeah, but I always love this. They just in their newspaper they called it Main Street Palmyra. They had this just great little setup. They had street lights and school, and they used the pool. And I mean, it was a really funny little time. So again, that's the city, right? So Dr. Chapman, I mean, again, really prolific guy in terms of his writing, but he had these great quotes and he had this very clear vision of what he thought the Pacific could be for the United States, especially post-war. I'm just going to read this, but in the last half of the 19th century, American economy was largely based upon the development of the Great Plains. The Pacific Ocean is the Great Plains of the last half of the 20th century. So he's saying Great Plains as in breadbasket, it's source of our most of our protein, most of our grains. It was where America learned to grow enough food to feed ourselves. That's the way he's using Great Plains here. And he thought that the future was the Pacific Ocean. And starting in the 40s, he pushed for that. He made a really hard campaign to get everybody to see the value and learning more and spending more time in the Pacific. And so in 1943, he gets, I share this because I think it's hard to conceptualize sometimes the breadth of when we say Japanese empire or Japanese influence. So you've got Hawaii over here, right? Here's Pearl Harbor. The United States is, before World War II, our Pacific fishing fleet was a broken down ship in San Francisco that we had used to try and fix the problem with the sardine fishing collapse. We did not have anything that was, scouring the Pacific. There were some private fishing vessels, obviously, and we were purchasing fish from the Japanese up until the war. But the Japanese, on the flip side of that, they were effectively and efficiently fishing the bulk of the Pacific. I mean, it was a really impressive spread. So as the United States starts taking some of these islands and moving forward in the Pacific, what they find is they don't have a way to feed the guys on the islands, right? They don't have that fishing backfill. They don't have a way to effectively bring those proteins and those resources to their guys. And so they hired Dr. Chapman to basically visit and to see if he could figure out a way to set up local fisheries on some of these islands, or at least close enough to each other that we didn't have to ship the stuff in from outside. And I'll read this in a second. There's not a lot of, there's some photographs of Palmyra at the time. I swore I had a photo of him on Palmyra. I don't, but he has this great report that he did of the 3 months he spent in the Pacific in 1943. And his entry in Palmyra isn't very long, but it's really great. I especially wanted to highlight the first part of this. So I'll read this whole thing, but as he just says, and this is September 1943. So he shows up on a plane, by the way, right? Which is the most dangerous way to travel in the Pacific at the time, is by far and away. Nothing comes close. Not only were our planes terrible up until about 1944, but the Japanese were also still flying around on the periphery. So still pretty dangerous. But he says we were never able to get out early in the morning at sunup for various reasons, and the fishing was uniformly poor during the middle of the day. But after 4 in the afternoon, the fishing was uniformly excellent, better than any tuna fishing that I encountered elsewhere in the Pacific. So that first part there, we were never able to get out in the early morning at sunup. I wanted to highlight here what Dr. Chapman was asking when he would show up at these active naval bases in the most violent conflict the world had ever seen up to that point in 1943. So he would show up and say, "Hey, I need a boat and a couple guys, and I need to go out into the oceans, and this is surrounding Palmyra, and a boat kind of like this on the right, not very large, and I need to sit there all day and just try and find tuna fish, try and find anything we can to see what the stocks are like around here." And you can imagine the guys in charge of these bases were not excited by that idea. I mean, that's like setting up targets in the ocean for somebody to hit. And the last thing they want is some civilian who's being paid by the army to get blown up in the water and them to get pushback on. So it was a big ask, and he would get stuff like, "No, you can't go out in the morning. That's when the Japanese are the most active. Sorry, I don't care how good the fishing is." And for context here too, Admiral Nimitz, who was the most powerful guy in the Pacific, he showed up on Palmyra a couple months after this. And Palmyra was even safer at the time, which I don't know if I mentioned that, but 43 Palmyra is one of the safest naval bases. It was only attacked in 41, unsuccessfully and very briefly. So it is the place where they went to refuel. The guys would have go on their version of shore leave. So it's pretty safe. Still, everybody's on edge, right? It's still a very hectic place. But anyway, so again, a couple months later, Admiral Nimitz showed up, and he got pushed back on fishing in the lagoons. They didn't want him to do it, and that was just in the lagoon, right? It's a dangerous place. So all that to say, Dr. Chapman he was very worried about his goals, right? He was very worried about what he needed to do to start feeding the troops, and didn't always notice the obvious context for how ridiculous things he was asking. So, and this is kind of the summary of his report on Palmyra. I really love this because it's such again, it highlights the uniqueness of Palmyra both at the time and since, and also I think the hope he had for the Pacific. He felt like Palmyra was reflective of what he wanted to see, was hoping to see in the rest of the Pacific. But there was no necessity for starting a fishery there on Palmyra. Men fishing with sport trolling gear were able to supply the fresh fish of the rather small garrison, if the boats were provided to get them out into blue water, meaning if the guy in charge at the time would allow them to go out. And I've since talked with men back from a year and more at Palmyra, and they reported the fishing was excellent the year round whenever they could get out to sea. And if there's anything that is consistent in the photographs we have from soldiers on Palmyra, it's they're holding fish. I mean, if you think about, these are guys coming from landlocked states, places like Indiana, where I'm from. They've never seen the Pacific. They may never have seen an ocean, but they know how to fish. And the fishing was great. So they would make they would just do traditional guy with a fish photographs all the time and send them back to their families. Partly because what they were catching was, tuna the size of them, as opposed to, rainbow trout like we catch here. It was a little bigger, but it's interesting to see those reports backed up by what the guys defaulted to when it comes to their free time on Palmyra. And I just wanted to, yeah, as far as Dr. Chapman, just to close out again with one of his quotes. These are so, whether you agree with them or not, again, it's such a good way of describing these things. But describing the Pacific, an empire of great riches where the land is as nothing and the sea is everything, an empire which no other nation save the Japanese covets, and which no other nation save theirs and ours can cultivate and make produce. Again, he had this singular vision for the Pacific being the future of the United States. I mean, the way he described it is economically in general. He thought that is where we would establish ourselves economically, was overcoming the Japanese in terms of fishing. So let's skip ahead a little bit to it's 1945, war's over. There's a group of guys who have been working on mainland Japan to help rebuild not just the fishing industry there so that the Japanese can feed themselves, but the economy in general. And again, someone I highly recommend looking into. Dr. Shimada was a scientist who got recruited by the army because he was Japanese. I mean, he was an American, but his parents were Japanese. He spoke fluent Japanese, and he ended up spending a lot of time behind enemy lines gathering information. And when Japan fell, he was already there. But he was a doctoral student in fisheries science, and he had studied with Dr. Chapman. So they knew each other. So they connect when they're both in Japan. And Shimada says, hey, it turns out Japan is not just like prolific at fishing because they have a lot of boats or they've been doing it for a long time. They had been investing for almost 100 years. They had been investing the bulk of their economy in fishing research and expertise. And they had fleets of deep ocean research vessels. They had outposts all around the Pacific. They had whole institutions and schools dedicated to studying fishery science when other countries were, still trying to give up whaling. I mean, it was this huge discovery for them. And in terms of impact for Dr. Chapman, this was like the in some ways at least, not the negative side necessarily, but the Operation Paperclip, when we brought all those scientists over to get us to the moon. This was the equivalent of that for fish sciences. I mean, we said, hey, we can use all this to jumpstart our programs and go from basically zero Pacific fishery science to the leader. I mean, world leader. It was just insane. And thousands and thousands of documents across hundreds of locations in Japan. But the problem was they were all in Japanese or Russian or German or these other, they were not in English. And that meant they weren't super helpful. So Shimada starts this program where he literally just goes around Japan, gathering all these things up and starts translating them. And it took him 4 years, but from 45 to 49, he basically just worked with teams to translate these documents. And I mean, this is just a couple pages of examples. There are, the Fish and Wildlife Service at the time published, along with the Department of the Interior, dozens of these bibliographies, and they all contained, 300 to 400 entries. So just again, thousands and thousands of things. And Chapman went to Congress and said, "Hey, we have all of the knowledge the Japanese have. We have control of all the islands. We now have a Pacific fleet when we didn't before. Give me $500,000 and I'll go make us the leading power in the world in terms of Pacific fishing, especially tuna fishing." And they said, okay, sure, why not? And so he did it. And starting in 1950, he launched the Pacific Ocean Fisheries Investigation. The MV Hugh Smith was technically the United States' first deep ocean research vessel. And the first place it went was Palmyra. It left Honolulu. At that time, Chapman was on board. He was very hands-on with the research at the start in 1950, and they went straight to Palmyra. They did some bait testing. The big problem at first was, great, let's go catch a bunch of tuna, but how do we get bait for it? The thought was, well, maybe we go to some of these atolls, we go into lagoons, and we pull out mullet, whatever bait fish we can get. Palmyra turned out to not be great for that, for a variety of reasons. But They started using these Japanese fishing methods, these line methods, this hyper efficient stuff that they'd never tried before, and it worked really, really well. And from there, they spread all around the Pacific. They went back to Palmyra a couple different times. There's an interesting log entry that says, I think between 1950 and 53, there were 13 of these vessels, because the fleet, as they were more successful, they kept growing the fleet. 13 of these vessels visited Palmyra like 30 times over those 3 years. It was a regular spot. And again, the crucial knowledge starts with Palmyra. That was the place they kicked these things off, and Chapman saw it as crucial to understanding how we would accomplish these things throughout the Pacific. So beyond that, I think what's really important here too is prior to 1950, even towards the end of the war, Palmyra was this place you would go and you would research a thing there, right? So Joseph Rock wrote a lot of papers on the plant species and the impact of certain activities from Hawaii, certain birds especially. E.H. Bryan had a lot of work he did. But again, it was about like studying the unique things on Palmyra, not Palmyra being a place to study other things. And after POFI, that completely shifts, and suddenly Palmyra is the place you go to study something else. It's got enough infrastructure that you can spend a couple months comfortably. Everybody enjoys being there, and just between 56 and 64, there were at least 9. I mean, these are the ones that we have documentation on. The government was doing all kinds of stuff they still don't talk about at the time in the Pacific, but there were 9 very documented, very well documented events where Palmyra was a central figure in studying those, but outside of itself. And so I always love to highlight those transitions in its role, especially in scientific and military funded studies. So quick break so I can take a drink of water, but also any questions on that before I move on to the other story? Any corrections, anything I got dramatically wrong about some of that should have been obvious?
What was the naval toxicity study on that list that you showed? Do you know?
Yeah. So there was and that has one of my favorite guys from Palmyra. There's I always forget his name, but I'll send you a couple links. I'll post a couple links or pin those on. But basically, people kept getting sick when they would eat. I think it was snapper. When they would eat the snapper around Palmyra, they kept getting sick. Ciguatera, I think, is what they ended up calling it. And but no one knew why, right? Yeah, it didn't. There was no like rational explanation. Though. It didn't really make sense. They eventually figured it out thanks to Bruce Halstead was the guy's name. There's a scientist named Bruce Halstead. Really interesting guy. He was on the Jacques Cousteau TV show a couple times. His focus was toxicity in venomous sea creatures, and he loved Palmyra. He loved going out there and taking teams and doing these studies. And so he, Loma Linda, which is out of California, they had a lot of overlap with Scripps, but Loma Linda would do all of these naval toxicity studies. And the one they did there was huge because once they figured it out what was going on, they went to all of these other places and said, "Yeah, here's why you're getting sick." And it had, again, I'm not going to explain it right. It had something to do with the way that the silt would get kicked up on the bottom of the lagoons and the work that had been done during the naval occupation, and it changed the dynamics in the lagoon, and the fish were getting sick, and then the people were getting sick. So very interesting study, though. Yeah, for sure. I'll make sure to dig up some of that stuff.
Jesse, just 2 things super quick. Like, one is on the Ciguatera thing. I mean, it's still an active body of research, and there's still a lot that's unknown about it. But one of the few associations that holds up pretty well is the association of it's caused by a dinoflagellate. There's a really well-established association between that and areas where there's a lot of dredging. So 100% consistent with with observations now around the globe that areas like this that have a lot of dredging disturbance in the tropics are going to be areas where you've had a lot of Ciguatera. The other thing is just an observation, which is the depth of information that you have on all of these things is incredible. Like, I am amazed that you have this much information on all of these different facets. Holy cow, man, you're incredible.
if you can direct your ADHD in the right ways, it can be beneficial occasionally. And yeah, my full-time gig is IT. I do IT project manager. So I think part of it is it's nice to have something that's a little more interesting to really go to town on. No offense to the technology industry, but thanks, Ed. That's very nice of you to say. That is definitely the goal. So again, as a quick shift here, I want to talk about Mark Collins now, which is, again, we're going from Pacific wide, global scale to a guy that I think one of the reasons I really like Mark's story is because he's also very representative of a lot of the guys I've either talked to or come across out of Honolulu. I mean, the fishing community there, and Mark was he lived in Maui most of his life, but there's a real um, community and vibe to these guys that's it's really entertaining. As an outsider, it's really entertaining to talk to them and hear their stories. And I think he's really representative of that, partly because they're also they're always looking to establish some kind of, I'm going to get rich fishing this one thing that no one's ever thought of before. And every one of them is just doing the same thing somewhere else. I mean, it is like copy and paste, and it's hilarious. But some of them do it, right? Some of them pull it off. Anyway, so again, let's talk about Palmyra in the mid 90s, 95 to 96. So and a couple of things especially important in the story. Palmyra's runway has its own history. You could probably write a whole book just about the runway and what it has and hasn't done, the lawsuits, the construction projects, the almost and never finished things. It's an interesting thing, but it was not in a great spot in the mid 90s. I think the photo here is from 97. And the only other photo I had of it that was was like 92, and they were landing. I mean, Fish and Wildlife especially convinced these pilots to land, and they did. But it was harrowing. It was it was pretty intense. But there was always the yachties were always visiting. I mean, and again, this is lower right hand corner here. We got Fish and Wildlife Survey. I again think this is from a 92 study where they sent some folks out there. But there's there's Roger in his hat. He just arrived on Palmyra a couple months earlier, and he was there from 92 to 99. And it's great. We have there's some videos on YouTube that he gave me, these old VHS tapes he had, because these yachties would show up with their their camcorder and let him borrow it for a couple weeks, and he would just go around and take these ridiculous videos. But you can see his progress from kind of he'd been sailing around the Pacific for a couple of years. He's eccentric, and he just goes all the way in on the Robinson Crusoe, Jack Sparrow nonsense. I mean, he just, by the end of it, he's wearing a loincloth and a knife, and he's running around talking to his dogs. I mean, it's awesome. It's so fun to see his transition. But anyway, so 95, 96, it's a pretty chaotic place. Palmyra doesn't really know what it is. The owners have been fending off just about everyone in terms of investment opportunities, because it's mostly, the nuclear storage dump keeps coming up again and again. And by 95, the Japanese were pushing really hard because they needed somewhere to put all this stuff. And Palmyra was close enough, and they had a good relationship with Hawaii. Hawaii kept saying, of course not. We're never, this is Senator Inouye, I think. I'm trying to remember there was a council that kept pushing back on them. I mean, they basically spent all their time trying to get the Japanese to stop asking. But the owners were getting tired of lawsuits, and it was getting a lot easier to sail through the Pacific. So people were doing it a lot more. And Roger showed up in 92 specifically to help alleviate some of that. It was getting out of hand, and he did a good job of that while he was there. But by 95, even, it was, I think we've got his journals basically. It was averaging 10 to 15 boats a month were showing up and, spending a couple weeks in Palmyra. And if he hadn't been there, who knows what they'd be doing. But it was getting pretty hairy. So that's the environment, right, that Mark Collins shows up in. And a little bit about Mark. I couldn't find too much, but he showed up with his brother in Maui in 1978. They grew up surfing in Manhattan Beach, California, near LA. There was a couple mentions of him being a championship surfer. I don't know what that means in the 70s. You know, it's not like they kept a lot of good records, but yeah, he was known for surfing and sport fishing, and he brought that with him to Maui. And any entry, any mention of him I find, it's either about fishing or surfing. I mean, he really loved it out there in the water. And this is yeah, he was part of this group that tried to sell kayak fishing the late 80s, early 90s around Maui, especially. And I'm assuming it went pretty well. They seem to really enjoy it. But yeah, Mark. I mean, you know, again, by 95, he'd been there. He was married. His family was there, and a lot of these guys would get some kind of investment opportunities. These smaller fishermen, they get some kind of, you know, they ended up making money off something. They get some deal that, you know, somebody would I don't know. That's a whole other thing in and of itself, how these guys would end up with some of this cash, but they would get, you know, $50,000, $100,000, and they would just start these ventures, and that's exactly what Mark did. Now, the other interesting thing that I found on him is he was a couple places described as being, it just said instrumental in the early Hawaii FAD program. Didn't give a lot of details, but the connection I think is that, you know, the early FADs that and there were 3 or 4 different groups in Hawaii that were putting these out to really help sport fishing and local fishermen. They were putting these out and around the islands, and they needed fishermen to go out and install them, but then also maintain them, because it was a new thing. Nobody was using these, and you know, the lines would get run over and cut. People would just think they were moorings, so they would tie off to them and then destroy them accidentally, and they wouldn't work anymore. So my guess is that Mark was probably one of the in that group of guys who really they would go out on some of these pretty hairy places, precarious spots around the islands, and fix these FADs and get things working again. So that's my best guess on that. But again, it was interesting that kept coming up and mentioned to him. No more detail than that, but especially with all the other stuff going on, I thought that was worth mentioning. So you know, getting back to Mark's big idea here, right? So it's 95, and he gets a full page taken out in the newspaper saying that he's going to start this fishing venture in Palmyra. And it was a lot. I'll go over some of the details of his plan, but this was, again, like, no one's really sure what Palmyra is. There's other islands too that people are wondering if there's value in, you know, not just commercial fishing, but casinos, hotels, ecotourism. Midway was supposed to be a prison for a bit. There's all kinds of stuff that people were throwing out and seeing if it would stick. And for whatever reason, I don't have definitive answers on it, but the Fuller Leo family gave him a lease on Palmyra. So he got a 5-year lease to fish the waters around Palmyra. They gave him full access to the dock, the airfield, and the harbor. It's interesting. They said that he could work. He had an acre around the dock and full use of the runway. As far as I know, it's more than an acre from the runway to the dock. And this was not I think I've got it marked wrong on here, by the way. It's a little to the left. This was not this was not the ramp. This was the dock that is no longer there, that was off of the moorings, I believe. So previous dock. And I'm sure Kate will yell at me later for exact location on that. But and then the lagoon. He could use the lagoon to get in and out as much as he wanted. So that was his initial plan. He was gonna go out there. He was gonna clear the runway, which was a mess at the time, and start setting up shop. And he was gonna have a fish processing plant on Palmyra. And once that was successful, he was gonna start doing. This has been announced in April. He wanted to have sport fishing by September, meaning he would have people that could pay. He could come out. He could fish Palmyra, the lagoons, the waters around it. Stay there for a bit with whoever they had, and then the investor, the family's owner's representative, was hoping to leverage that into a hotel. He wanted to have at least 100, maybe 200 person hotel on the atoll. But this was supposed to be the big proof of concept. Could they get it to work? Could they get people interested? And if so, you know, how big could they go with it? So Mark had this brilliant plan, right? And he was so excited. You can tell in the way he describes, he was so excited about it and impressed with himself. He was going to have 5 fishing trawlers. They were going to go out in the waters around Palmyra. It had to be a mile out. They were going to get all the tuna they could. They were going to bring it back. They were going to process it. They were going to throw it on a C-130 that he had leased, and they were going to fly it back to Honolulu, drop it off, and it would be fresh on the markets in the morning. That was the plan. And this is Roger holding one of the tuna. There was no doubt that the tuna was there, right? Because that would seem to be the easy part. So he goes out with one ship to start, and sorry for it says some text here that's hard to read, but didn't want to forget anything. So April 28th, he announces, that's the newspaper article. By early July, he actually shows up. He's got a ship. He's got 8 crew members. He's got a plan to go out and catch enough tuna to raise some money, prove the concept, go back to Honolulu. So he goes out for a couple days and comes back with a catch. And then he goes back to Honolulu, and all of that gets lost on the way back because the refrigerator dies and toast. So he has nothing to show for it. So he comes back in August, smaller crew this time, and it's also made up of family members and friends. There's only about 4 guys. 1 is his brother and 2 are friends. That tells you anything about who was willing to sign up for round 2, and the favors he was calling in. They show up, tries the same thing again, gets out in the water, gets a decent catch, fridge breaks down again. And so he goes to Fanning, and the idea is he's going to go to Fanning. He's going to hire some additional, some guys from there to help him fish the waters and help him set up shop on Palmyra. On the way back from Fanning, catches some tuna. Refrigerator breaks again, and he's out that catch. So at this point, I don't know where Mark got his money from. I am sure he owes other people money now, but he's out. He's got nothing to show for this. Months of fishing, God knows how much he spent. And so he gets desperate, and he does a big catch of shark. It's very unfortunate, certainly not pretty, but he figures he can sell that to certain groups in the Pacific that will always buy parts of the shark and at least make some of his money back. But that friggin' fridge, man, fails again, and he loses it, and he has to dump it all in the lagoons. And Roger at this point, who, by the way, Roger is like, he's very inviting. He knew Mark from before this happened, and he's doing everything he can to help him, just, make sure everything's working, encouraging him and his crew. But when Mark dumps a big load of shark carcasses into the lagoons in Palmyra, he's pretty pissed. I mean, A, because he does not like to see shark fishing in the first place, but also everything that came into the lagoon to get that made it a little hairy to get in and out for a while. So after that, Mark goes back to Honolulu. He says he's going to rally, he's going to figure it out. And the next time we hear from Mark is in January of 1996, when he gets arrested in Kiribati with his crew because he didn't have the right fishing license. And there's this whole drama that ensues where he's swearing he had the right paperwork and they're saying he didn't. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because as far as the Kiribati are concerned, it's his mistake. So it's not too bad, right? The crew spend about 10 days in jail. Mark spends about 30. And when we say jail, they put him in a hotel in Kiribati for a month. I mean, it's not like he was suffering. He just, couldn't leave, basically under house arrest in a pretty decent hotel. But something happens, leg injury somehow, and when he's finally released and tries to sail back to Honolulu, he stops at Palmyra, and Roger basically administers some island medicine. He soaks his legs in salt water for a couple days and gives him whatever he can, saves his legs, thankfully, and he makes it back to Honolulu. But Mark spends the next couple months in and out of hospitals recovering. We don't have a whole lot of detail, but poor guy just couldn't get a break. And Roger did say in some of the conversations that he heard from, Mark was still convinced. He was like, that's okay. These are setbacks, but I can still make this work. And then the Sustainable Fisheries Act comes out. Yeah, I don't know who had Bill Clinton being on a slide in their bingo card, but you're welcome. There you go. So Clinton signs the Sustainable Fisheries Act, and it puts everything in question. So the owners of Palmyra shut down any fishing activities. Everybody's trying to scramble and figure out is this going to throw off the leases? Everybody starts getting sued because they start cutting off these leases and saying, no, you can't fish. There's too many unknowns. And then they go, yeah, well, technically we still could, right? It's not illegal. So you need to honor this. Anyway, it becomes this huge mess. And this really convinces the Fuller Leos that they're done. Like this is it. They are done with leasing fishing rights and allowing fishing activities. And beyond this, it's they have some minor interest from folks like Bill Gates, but the conversations really start to switch to what happened in 1999 when conservation becomes the name of the game, and they decide that saving Palmyra is more important than farming it. But yeah, I like Mark's story because it's such a good example of how those things would go for those guys. But he's so positive the whole time, right? I mean, he's described as just this, this big, lovable guy who really just wanted to do what he could, make some money on Palmyra, but not in a, he kept using words like, conservation, responsible fishing practices. He wanted to do line fishing in a way that many wouldn't outdo the stocks, and he could come back and people could still fish as they needed to. But it's cool because the rest of his life, he unfortunately died fairly young in 2016. But he spent the rest of his life doing a lot of he was really involved in Maui in the water quality, and he had a lot of entries of him going to town hall meetings and voicing concerns that the local fishermen have about changes and all of this incoming stuff. So he was just really involved. He really cared about this stuff. He cared about Maui. He cared about Palmyra while he was there, and he unfortunately made some dramatic calls and didn't have the best turnout. But I just love that he didn't give up on the stuff that he loved doing, like fishing and surfing and enjoying the hell out of the Pacific. So yeah, so that's the stories. Again, I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A, whether it's about Mark or anything else I talked about. But yeah, thank you guys so much for letting me, like I said, nerd out about this stuff. Having a excuse to share a lot of this is really, really fun for me. And I really appreciate the work you guys do. It's incredible to hear about it. So when I see articles about the new stuff that's being done there, the activities, the papers that come out, it's so cool to see how that mirrors some of the work that was done before and what was done to keep Palmyra safe till it was able to get in safer hands. But yeah, thanks again for the chance to talk. So yeah, any questions you guys have about this or anything else, happy to answer.
Curious if anyone on the call knows if the maintenance shop was actually the fridge that was being used, because it is like a insulated facility, right? Like it's a big refrigerator. Does anyone know?
Still a lot of foam there. There's still boards.
Yeah, the walls are insulated, right?
Yeah, that's
And
my
the
understanding.
doors are locker.
It was the freezer for, I think, the final operation. I don't know a lot of details. Yeah, too bad. Maybe Eric may know, but yeah, too bad the kid's not here, or Hank. Eric, do you have any conversations?
No, nothing definitive. I mean, I've heard the same thing, but yeah, I've heard the same thing, but nothing definitive.
There was yeah, I'll have to look at that. There was I think it was 2 months after this. There was a big cleanup project that came out to Palmyra. I think they were there for 3 months because Roger had reported that there were those leaks into the lagoon. Like gas was diesel was coming from somewhere, and he couldn't figure out where. And so thankfully they I forget which group it was, but they came out. Might have been, I think the Coast Guard came out initially, and then whoever ended up paying for it, right? But they came out and cleaned up. And I know that during that time they built some temporary, they did some housing and facilities for because there was a big crew, right? They were bringing out barges of stuff and then taking barges back. So there was semi-permanent facilities built for some of those guys, but they were also living off the boats. So maybe they didn't do any of that at all too. I may not have needed it as much.
I've run into some Army Corps documents from around that time in the late 90s.
Oh, yeah.
The Army Corps may have, I know they
That's
certainly
stuff.
did a lot of surveying and scoping. I don't know if they actually did the cleanup or if they, presumably they probably contracted out the physical cleanup. I'm not 100% sure on that one.
Nope, you're 100%. That's 100%. I was checking some of my notes. Yeah, Army Corps of Engineers showed up. Yeah, September. Yeah, and it was the underground storage tanks. That's what they figured out. Is that when they had, because during the war the worst thing you could do was put a bunch of barrels on the surface for somebody to blow up. So they made these huge, it was out along the runway, these huge underground tanks for storing all the fuel. And, like I said, when the Navy left, they just left and they bulldozed over a lot of stuff. And then just, so I don't think at the time, I don't think anyone even knew they were there. I think they were covered in plants and coral concrete and all that kind of stuff. So that's what the engineers did. That's it though.
A question, Jesse. It sounded like the Japanese had the commercial fishing market basically cornered for certainly basically all the Western Pacific. And have you run into any archived information? Was there really only that one vessel on the West Coast pursuing fishing in the Pacific long range, but really the United States had basically no interest at that time in commercial fishing other than maybe around Alaska?
That's as in, is there, so the question is, was the US doing any other far reaching into the Pacific?
Right.
No, I mean, the
Pre-World War
comments
II.
and right, pre-World War II. Yeah, and again, some of this gets political, right? I don't know if Dr. Chapman was painting a picture that would better sell what he thought should happen, or whether, he seems, in that regard, he seems pretty accurate. And there were other reports outside of what he had done. That what I found is that there was and I don't know much about this, but I know there was the sardine fishing industry along California, and the West Coast collapsed at a certain point, and nobody knew what to do about it. And so there was some investment in figuring out how to recover from that, and that warranted some research vessels, research equipment, research activities. Outside of that, there was this, and again, I'm going to talk completely out of my butt on this. You guys are going to know way more than me. But one of the things Chapman was known for is he was part of this group of kind of young fishery experts out of the state of University of Washington, state of Washington, and they had all been inspired by the dynamic oceanography model, which basically said, hey, instead of going, well, there's no fish here, that must mean the fish left. It's like, no, there's weather patterns and current patterns and spawning activities. And like, it's a whole picture, right? It's the weather, right? Anything can impact everything. So they were using a lot of the work to prove that out. Like, this was a theory at the time, and they were using the work during World War II and even before that to prove that theory out. I say all that to say, I think that the United States, much like it had with a lot of other things at the time, if it wasn't like making money, if it wasn't establishing, I don't know, xenophobic is like an understatement, right? The Japanese were not the only xenophobic country at the time, right? The United States didn't want to get involved in anything, and as soon as you hit those coasts, it was like, I don't know. Are we really that country? Is that really where we want to invest our time and money? Like, you get a couple miles out, and I don't know. So that seems to be the attitude until, after World War II, suddenly we owned, whether we liked it or not, everything the Japanese had before. I mean, and by own, I mean we said that it was ours now. And one of the interesting things that came up in this, there was a especially good article about Dr. Chapman's work with not just POFI, but the documents that inspired POFI. And it makes this really broad point that we don't talk enough about how we took the Japanese research work, equipment, methods, and we used those, which, good or bad, I'm not making a value judgment here, but we should at least acknowledge where it came from, right? And that has just not been the pattern. It's been, well, we made all of these big discoveries, and it's like, if von Braun got us to the moon, the Japanese fishing technologies got us to the Pacific, right? That's the point they were trying to make, which I thought was really interesting. So yeah, that's probably the longest possible answer to that question. I mean, I can stretch it a little bit, but you're welcome.
Thank you.
This isn't a question, but just an observation maybe is Jesse, just so you know, like back in what 2012 to 2014, we partnered with UC Santa Barbara and did this big population assessment of reef shark around Palmyra, gray reefs, black tips, a little bit of white tips. And that was one of the things we talked a lot about during that time period, was that there had been this big fishing effort for sharks in the late 90s, but we didn't know that much about it. We knew it happened. So like we had all these conversations about like, hey, are we measuring what a pristine shark population, or are we measuring a shark population that's still on the rebound from a big fishing effort? Sharks are notoriously sort of slow growing, and it's why they're terrible fishery species. But anyway, there's this just wanted to share that and say that this has been really helpful, because now I understand the context behind that and what exactly that fishing effort was, which is really interesting and helpful to know. So thank you.
Yeah, no, and that's interesting to hear too. There's all these, the stories, and it's up until the naval occupation. I mean, no one describes Palmyra as having some sharks, right? They don't describe it as there's sharks at Palmyra. It is always these like alliterative statements about like just churning waters and hordes and thousands. I mean, you could walk through they were mostly harmless too, right? Like there are very, very few. I think there's only one recorded injury from a shark, at least that I've ever found up until World War II. But there's the crazy amounts of sharks, and even, Roger commented a lot on it, how he did not allow that once he was there in '92. He as much as he could prohibited anybody fishing for sharks in the lagoons, but he couldn't do anything about the surrounding waters, right? I mean, that was whether they were supposed to or not. He's not going to be able to get out there every time he sees a boat and questions what they're doing. So how long that activity went on for is yeah, that is really interesting that they, like you said, that like what's the baseline? What's a healthy shark population of Palmyra? That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I mean that was the core question, right? It's just like the sharks are one of the first things to go in most places where people are, and that was the whole premise of our study, was trying to understand what an unfished shark population looks like, but with this giant asterisk that, like, well, not fished at all for the last 15 years, but so it's always had that qualifier next to it.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's really interesting. I don't understand half the guys or half the stuff you guys write reports on, but it's over my head. But I always like pretending I do and read through. So check it out. Yes, Evelyn.
Hi, this is incredible. I've seen some of your stuff before, but it just blows my mind. So thank you. My question is about, if I understood correctly, you were mentioning you had VHS tapes that you would, I guess, uploaded to YouTube about that guy Mark's escapades.
Oh no, sorry, about the Rogers time, Roger time on
Sorry.
Palmyra in the '90s. Sorry.
Well, I might have missed the name, but I guess how would I search for them, or are they linked from your website? They sound amazing.
Yeah, no, I'll put a link to the there's a archive YouTube channel that has all those and some other stuff. I will post that in the chat, and then I can send it to Matt or whoever else makes him to send it to. But yeah, and there is, speaking of that, there is I didn't put it anywhere in the presentation because I don't like to put videos in the presentation, but there is a digitized film reel from 1950. So from when we don't exactly know where in the Pacific it was, but you can see them you know, on the Smith fishing the Pacific in 1950. And it's likely outside Palmyra in the waters. I try to err on the side of if it doesn't say, I don't think it is, but there's a pretty good chance it's Eastern Pacific. And it's really incredible to see these guys at work. So I'll find a link to that too. Again, I can send all this on because it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, really, your research is just so incredible. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's very neat. So
Yes, yeah. Go ahead. Maybe you guys might need to get closer to the computer so we can hear you.
Off the wall question here. There's a map in the galley of the old military base here. It only shows pretty much Cooper Island, that area. Do you have a map that shows the whole, where all the buildings and everything were on all the other islands too?
there's so many maps. I love maps. I have too many maps. Yes, I will. As many of them as there's some that are not because they're like photographs of the map, so they're not super great, but they do still tell the story. So yeah, I'll put a link to some of those, especially the other thing that's really cool is the NCAR, which was a Navy program. They did aerials all over the Pacific of naval bases, and the Smithsonian had all of those. So we also have these like, and I think they're stitched. I think they're stitched together. But anyway, it's an aerial of 1943. So it's mostly done, right? The construction is mostly done. I'll make sure to share that too because it's really cool to see, you know, just right above everything that they've done. Some of it, I mean, it's also a little sad because they didn't pull any punches with the dredging, but it is really, really interesting to see that build up. But absolutely, yeah, I'll put that stuff together and send it on because there is, yeah, when I was out there in 2019, I printed out one of them to, you know, because I was trying to go around and just figure out where some of the, you know, what was left, where it was on the map. And it is amazing how much has shifted, right? Stuff that's further one direction than it looks on the map, stuff that's gotten what survived and what hasn't from that. It's just crazy. And bearing in mind that some of it was reclaimed by visiting folks, some of it, you know, some of it wasn't. But yeah, no, I'll make sure to put some of that together and send it on to Matt, and then I, you know, so you can get it to whoever. But yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Zach wants to know if the treasure of the Esperanza has been found yet.
Depends on who you ask. But yeah, I'll tell you what. If we do this again, I'd love to do one on that. It's such a man. It's such nonsense. I love it because it's if it's there, it's on home island. That's what the consensus is. Because it's the only place that it could be because home didn't get dug up or messed with nearly as much as anything else, and I can get extra nerdy on why and all that stuff. But I'll have to, it'll do that if we do it again, because man, I love that topic so much. It's so silly. It's great.
And just a detail to share too, home is also the only parcel within Palmyra that is not owned or administered by TNC and Fish and Wildlife. That is still privately held.
Yeah, Cooper's descendants, I think, still have it, right? It's and then I think the joke was it was split between 3 people, and then the island split, and so now they got to split 2 islands 3 ways. But yeah, I've talked to one of those guys who's really, really nice guy, and he was a ham radio operator. So I contacted him about that. I had no idea that he had any other connection to the island or to Home Island specifically, but he had mentioned it in some ham radio magazine. Man, you talk about a community. Those guys are nuts. It's so fun learning about those guys. They are also like there are a whole like the Fuller Leos. They hated 2 people. I forget, there was a senator, I forget his name, who he was the one that ended up not allowing Palmyra to be considered part of the Hawaiian territory. They hated him and they hated the ham radio operators. Those are the 2. They don't hate anybody more than they hated them for a lot of good reasons. But yeah, those guys are great.
All right. Well, thanks, Jesse. We're a little over time, but I'm sure we all have lots more questions, but we can maybe hold them for the next town hall. Really appreciate it. And yeah, if you don't mind, maybe I'll reach out to you sometime to see if there's interest in doing another one sometime down the road.
Yeah, and I'll try to remember everything you guys asked for and send it on to Matt, and then go from there. But again, please feel free to reach out and ask for specifics. I'm happy to share whatever I can. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, Jesse, that's awesome, man. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you,
later.
everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Jesse, can you hang on a sec? No, it's gone. Hey, Matt, I just had a few presentation ideas I just wanted to pass along.
Yep.
For Jesse, I can also just send an email, but he mentioned runway. That's like a whole saga, the runway. That would be super interesting.
I know.